How's my favorite side of the class? How's my favorite side of the class? Good? All right. Okay, good deal. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to address before I move on and forget to talk about it is somebody had asked about calculating your grade on Canvas. Now, of course, we've been over this. Your grade on Canvas is not correct. I do not have a way to make it correct this semester because you have to do that at the beginning of the semester, and I don't know how to do that. So maybe by next semester I will, or maybe they'll change it up so that it's easier to deal with. But let me show you. Now, if you go to the syllabus, and this is just on Canvas, this is your syllabus. This is under grading procedures. This is how much the tests count and the quizzes count. Okay, so the tests count 28% each. The quizzes count 4% each, and only the 4 highest quiz grades count. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're simply going to take your grade on test 1 plus any bonus points times 0.28 plus your grade on test 2, and I'll go ahead and write this out while I'm talking about it. All right, so if this will write. All right, so it's going to be test 1 plus any bonus points, okay? So if you got your 5 bonus points, add that to it, times 0.28 plus test 2 plus any bonus points. So if you got the 5 bonus points, times 0.28 plus, and you can, let's just go and do the quizzes first. So it's going to be quiz 1 times 0.04. Now these are going to be your high 4 highest quizzes, whatever they are, okay? So just your highest quiz 1 plus your highest quiz 2 plus, that's a 4 by the way, your highest quiz 3. We're going to have to move on down here, plus quiz 4 times 0.04 plus, now this is where you kind of have to estimate some, the final exam plus the bonus test. And to make it technically correct, I'll put my 2 parentheses there, times 0.28. Actually, that one shouldn't be there. I can take that one out. But anyway, you kind of get the point of you have to estimate. Let me get rid of this. So you just have to estimate the final and bonus exam portion. So you can just say, okay, you know, what if I make, let's see, where is it? So what if I make an 80 on the final plus a 12 on the bonus? Okay, so you got a 92 times 0.28. And that would give you, once you add all of that together, that's going to give you your score. So what I'm going to do whenever I'm calculating tests, I'm going to download all your scores to Excel. I'm going to put this into a formula. I'm going to go through, find each of your 4 highest quiz grades, and that's going to be your grade, okay? So I try to be as fair as possible. I try to give you as many bonus points as possible. Whenever I calculate the grade, wherever it lands, that's where it lands. If it lands on a 0.5 or higher, I will round up, okay? So if you're at a 89.5, I will round up to a 90. But there has to be a cutoff point somewhere. I try to give you all the opportunities in the world, but there just has to be a cutoff point. So does everybody understand that? I mean, you're good on that? And remember, this will not match what is on Canvas. Canvas is not going to change this semester, so it's not automatically going to be updated to some new grade. This is how you calculate your grade. But in looking at the grades, I mean, I think everybody in class is doing okay. Some of you are doing fantastic. Some of you are doing maybe a little bit worse than you thought, but you can still make up a lot of points on this final exam. So, and the bonus test. All right, so that's how you calculate your grade in this class. And if anybody has any questions, or if you want to come up and talk to me after class, or anything regarding that, I'll be happy to discuss it with you. All right, so let's take a look at your study guide really quickly before we look at the practice questions. And I mean, this is not that difficult, okay? Your study guide, you've got chapter 6, 7, and then the first 6 slides from chapter 10, and then the slides from chapter 11 on your final exam. And then you've got the bonus test material, which are slides 7 through 30 and chapter 12. So I think there were 2 slides related to that. So going back to chapter 6, which seems like a long time ago, but that was our bond valuation chapter. So things like, what is valuation? What are the key valuation inputs? Also the basic valuation model. Okay, and basically all that said was that the value of any asset is equal to the present value of the future expected cash flows. So whether we're valuing stock, bonds, a business, whatever. That's how we would do it. A bond, what's the definition? How do we price a bond or calculate its present value is another way of saying that. And for annual coupon payments and for more frequent than annual coupon payments. So for example, semi-annual. We can take a look at that in our practice questions today. Also, bond value behavior. This is referring to simply the negative relationship between bond prices and interest rates. When interest rates go up, bond prices go down. When interest rates go down, bond prices go up. And also yield to maturity, or YTM. What is it and how do you calculate it? And with the financial calculator, it's really simple to calculate. The only thing that you need to be aware of with yield to maturity, and we talked about this, if you go back and review the integrity recording, you can see this part. If you have semi-annual interest payments and you're calculating yield to maturity, once you make all of your changes and put them into your calculator and compute the I/Y, the number that you're going to see for semi-annual interest payment bonds, calculating yield to maturity, is going to be the 6-month rate. Okay? So I said what you have to do there is you have to take that number and multiply it by 2 to come up with the annual rate, which is actually the yield to maturity, which is always an annual interest rate. All right, chapter 7, stock valuation. What is an undervalued stock? What is an overvalued stock? The definition of the efficient market hypothesis, and what do we consider our stock markets? Okay, are they weak form efficient, semi-strong form efficient, strong form efficient? We went over this in class. I said our markets are considered weak form efficient and semi-strong form efficient for the most part. They are not strong form efficient, since insiders can make excessive profits. So if you conduct insider trading, you can make a fortune, but it's illegal. So that's why our markets are not strong form efficient. And how to value common and preferred stock. We talked about the zero growth model and the constant growth model. And then also other approaches to common stock valuation. I said you need to read that on your own. Things like book value, liquidation value, etc. And that is in your slides and in your book. And then the first 6 slides from chapter 10, this was the capital budget. In chapter 11, this was capital budgeting. So this was basically terminology in chapter 10. So what's the definition of capital budgeting? What is a capital expenditure versus a current expenditure? Key motives for capital expenditures. And this is going to be we just concentrated on 2 really. That is a replacement or expansion project. What are independent projects versus mutually exclusive projects? What is unlimited capital versus capital rationing? Conventional and non-conventional cash flow patterns. Somebody had mentioned that, asked me about that the other day. Basically what this is, a conventional cash flow pattern, and we saw this in your book, that was where if you have, for example, if I can get this working. Okay, so let's say, for example, you have a timeline, and we can just do kind of a short timeline, 3, 4, okay. So let's say this is your initial investment, and this is time period 1, and then let's say, for example, once you've invested in this project, it's going to provide $3,000 positive the first year. It's going to provide, and we'll write this higher, it's going to provide, let's say after the first year, something happens, you know it's probably going to have to be taken offline, torn down, refurbished, whatever, you're going to have to spend money. And so the second year, you actually expect a negative $1,000 cash flow. And then the third year is going to provide a $4,000 cash inflow. Okay, the reason that this is what's called a non-conventional cash flow pattern is because you have a negative cash flow. Typically, you have all positive cash flows after that. So you invest in the project, whatever it is, it starts working for you and it provides all positive cash flows. That's what's called a conventional cash flow pattern. But this is non-conventional simply because sometime during the life, other than the initial investment, we have a negative cash flow. So we went from a negative cash flow to positive, back to negative, and then to positive. So this negative cash flow causes it to be a non-conventional cash flow pattern. Nothing more complicated than that. Okay? And if it were conventional, you would simply see all of your numbers here in the positive territory after the initial investment. All right. And then replacement versus expansion. Know how to select or rank projects, and we'll see an example of that in the practice questions if they're independent or mutually exclusive. The cash flow components of capital budgeting, there were 3 that we talked about. The initial investment, that's what you're spending. The operating cash flows, that's what once you purchase this asset, then it provides hopefully positive cash flows for you. And then some assets we said have something called a terminal cash flow. That could be positive or negative depending on the project. And then the relevant or incremental cash flows, these are simply the after-tax cash flows created by the asset, whatever it is. Okay, so the after-tax cash flows. Now, the bonus test, it's going to be 15 questions. They count 1 point each. They will be multiple choice. I think they're all multiple choice. There might be 1 or 2 true, false questions in there. But 15 questions, so know how to calculate. Now these come from chapter 10 and then chapter 12, so know how to calculate and the benefits and weaknesses of the payback period, net present value, and internal rate of return using conventional and non-conventional cash flow patterns. So what that simply means is you just enter the cash flows when they occur and you calculate net present value, internal rate of return, or payback period. And again, we'll look at that in just a minute. Know why net present value and internal rate of return can result in conflicting rankings. We talked about that the last time we met. Know why net present value is theoretically better and why internal rate of return is the most popular. And we discussed that also the last time. And what is the certainty equivalent method? What is the risk-adjusted discount rate method? And what is the definition of a risk? These are all from chapter 12, these last 3 items here. Okay? But other than that, that is it. Okay, now, let me ask first, are there any questions about this before we talk about the practice questions? The interest rate and all of that, you're just concentrate on the valuation, okay? Because you talk about interest rates in other classes, so that's why we really didn't spend much time on it in here. We also talked about interest rates back in chapter 5 and in chapter 8. So we've already discussed that, so you can just move on to the valuation section. Either expansion or, actually it's listed here, I just didn't see it, it's here. Replacement or expansion project. In your book, there will be others. There will be probably 4 or 5, but these are the only 2 that we're really concerned about. Okay, good questions. Other questions before we look at some of the practice questions? All right, let me bring that up. All right. Now, you'll notice on your practice questions, and actually I worked through these, so let me find these. Aha. Okay, I think I worked through all of the problems. So what you will notice is when you see here, the answers are here with the questions, okay? So what I'm going to focus on, we can kind of go through these, but I'll kind of focus on, why the answer is what it is. Some of them I may just skip through unless you have a question about it. I mean, I'll be happy to go back and discuss it. Mostly what I'm going to focus on is going to be the problems. So for example, number 7 or number 9. But let's just go through and talk about each of these really quickly. The cost of long-term debt is generally blank that of short-term debt. So you can see the answer is C. It's greater than. Why is the cost of long-term debt generally greater than the cost of short-term debt? Okay, but the interest rates are related to what? Time, okay? So with the long-term debt, you're using the lender's money longer. I mean, it's just as simple as that. And so when you use somebody's money for a longer period of time, you expect to pay a higher interest rate. Number 2, a blank is a restricted provision on a bond which provides for the systematic retirement of the bonds prior to their maturity. That is going to be what's called a sinking fund requirement. That is in your book, okay? That's one of the things that I mentioned for you to take a look at on your own. It's also in the slides. And what that simply means is if a company, let's say they issue $30 million in bonds, they don't want to have to come up with the entire $30 million payoff when the bonds mature. So what they may do is they may retire or pay off a portion or a fraction of this bond issue each year. So let's say they pay off 3% of it each year. Well, 3% of it over 30 years, they're going to have 90% of it paid off by the time the bond matures, which is going to leave them only having to come up with 10% of the par value to pay off when the bond matures. If a bond pays $1,000 plus interest at maturity, the $1,000 is called the par value. I think most of you are good with that. All of the following are examples of restrictive debt covenants except which one? The answer is B. Now, remember, restrictive debt covenants, this says what the borrower cannot do. And so, supplying the creditor with audited financial statements, this would be an example of what's called an affirmative debt covenant, which means this is something the borrower has to do, okay? So typically, the borrower has to provide the lender with updated financial statements. Number 5, the blank feature permits the issuer to repurchase bonds at a stated price prior to maturity. That would be the call feature, and we talked about that in the slides in class. Number 6, the less certain the cash flow, the blank the risk, and the blank the present value of the cash flow. So the answer will be C. The less certain the cash flow, the higher the risk, and the lower the present value of the cash flow. So does somebody want to explain this to me, how this, basically what this is telling you mathematically? Now, when you all talk at once, I can't understand you, okay? So, okay, all this is saying is we're talking about risk, and we said essentially risk, and it has lots of definitions in finance, but risk is the certainty of receiving the cash flows from an investment. So this is saying the less certain that you are of receiving a cash flow from an investment, the higher the risk. And the higher the risk means we're going to use a higher discount rate when we're calculating the present value. So all this is referring to is simply this part. So if we go back to chapter 5 where we had present value is equal to the future value divided by 1 plus r raised to the nth power. All this is saying is, and we can, instead of future value, we can put cash flow here. This is referring to the R. So if we've got an average risk project, maybe the expected return or the discount rate is 8%. If you've got a really risky project, maybe the expected return or the discount rate is 18%. With this number here, the present value is going to be smaller. So the higher the discount rate, the smaller the present value. We went over that probably at least a couple of times in class. So does that make sense to everybody in terms of what's happening? Okay, just stay with me for about just a few more minutes, okay? Then I promise you, you can just stop thinking altogether until you start studying for the test. Just hang with me for a few more minutes. All right, you guys are wore out, I can tell. All right, so let's go here. All right, number 7. A firm has issued $1,000 par value bonds with a 9% stated interest rate outstanding. The firm pays interest annually and has 20 years remaining to its maturity date. If bonds of similar risk are currently paying 11%, the firm's bond will sell for what? Okay, this is just a bond valuation problem. So with this one, and I did go through and work it out by hand. So the inputs for this would be your future value, $1,000. N is 20. The I/Y is 11. And the payment is $90 per year. What we're solving for, what we want to compute, is the present value or the price of the bond. And so if we work through that, and I'll bring the calculator up in just a second and work that. But you should come up with answer C, which is 840.67. So I want to make sure, and I've got an extra calculator up here if somebody needs to borrow it. I want to make sure that everybody's working through this and coming up with the right numbers before we leave class. All right, so if we want to work this, now I'm going to check my payments per year first. So if I press the second key, I/Y, I want to be on one payment per year, which is where I am. And then once I'm back to zeros, I'm going to go through the clear process. Second, clear time value of money. Second, clear work. And then I'm going to enter my inputs, which were 1,000. Press my future value key. 20 is my N. 11 I/Y. And $90 is my payment. I've got my 4 inputs. I want to solve for the 5th, which is present value. So I'll press my compute key in the top left-hand corner and the present value key. And you'll notice it's off 6 cents due to rounding compared to your answer. So it says 840.67. This says 840.73. You may see that a little bit occasionally, but I mean there won't be any problem in determining which is the answer. Okay, so for example, you won't have 840.67 and 840.80 cents. Okay, so you won't be faced with that problem. There'll be enough space between the answers that you won't have any problem with that. But did everybody come up with this number? Yes, all right, I got a response. That is fantastic. All right, number 8. The answer is A. A bond will sell at a premium when the stated rate of interest exceeds the required return, and at a discount when the stated rate of interest is less than the required return, and equal to the par value when the rate of interest is equal to the required return. Now, with something like this, if you're sitting there and you see this question on the test and you're thinking, okay, I'm not really sure what the answer is, all you have to do is work out an example. So just make up some numbers for a bond, have the interest rate that the bond is paying, the coupon rate, higher than the I/Y. See what you come up with. Do you come up with the bond selling for more than 1,000 or less than 1,000? And you can just work through this to come up with the correct answer. All right, number 9. We've got a bond, $1,000 par value, 15% annual coupon interest. The bond matures in 10 years, currently sells for $12.50. Calculate the yield to maturity. All right, so with this one, the inputs, and let's see, this is number 9. The inputs are going to be the future value, the present value. Remember, the present value has to be entered as a negative number. The N and the payment. Now, for the yield to maturity, we want to compute the I/Y, which is the yield to maturity, and it should come up to, it says the answer is A, 10.79%. We'll take a look at that in just a second. I'll make sure everybody has this written down. That is, yes, this is a negative. I don't know. Let's see here. It pays a 15% annual coupon rate. What did I put down? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I actually have 150 written down in front of me. I just decided not to write the 0. Okay, there we go. Thank you for that. All right, so once we have that, let me switch over here. Okay, so again, really important. So we're going to go through the clear process. And I'll enter the information. $1,000 is the future value. $12.50 negative, we'll make it negative here, is the present value. 10 is my N, and 150 is the payment. Then I want to compute the I/Y. And it comes up to 10.79%. So this means if you pay $12.50 for this bond today, hold it 10 years until maturity, you're going to make 10.79% per year. That is your percentage yield to maturity. So that everybody come up with 10.79%. And if you happen to be getting, for example, this message, that means that you did not enter your present value as a negative number. Okay, so if that pops up, you're taking the test, you're in a hurry, you're nervous, whatever, you see this, automatically you're thinking, okay, I need to enter my present value as a negative number. And once you do, you will come up with the correct, well, won't even let me do it now, okay. But you'll come up with the correct answer. All right, let's see. Number 10. Okay, that's a lot of stuff there. Let's see. All right, so he's got 2 bonds to choose from. One is a 10% coupon, 10-year maturity, $1,000 par value bond. Pays annual interest. The second bond is a 10% coupon, 10-year maturity, $1,000 par value bond. That pays semi-annual interest. Okay. The market required return on each bond is 10%. When using the present value to determine the price of the bond, you will find that now when you're with this one, what you're going to find out is whether it's semi-annual or annual interest, you're going to find out that each of these are going to be worth $1,000. Okay, so even though I'm just not really all that enthused about this question, so let's change this up some. Let's say, for example, that the required return on both of these bonds, instead of being 10%, let's say that the required return or the discount rate is going to be 7%. So what I want you to do is calculate the price of this annual coupon bond using a 7% discount rate and the semi-annual bond using a 7% discount rate and see what the difference is, because that gives you practice working with semi-annual coupon. All right, so what I'm going to do, let's see if I can I didn't actually work through this one, so let's try to have the input. So for the first one, so this is the annual payment bond. All right, so future value for I/Y in and payment. And what we want is the present value. All right, so let's see, what do we have here? The first one is so it's going to be $1,000. The I/Y is going to be 7% because remember we're changing everything up here to a 7% required return. N is going to be 10. And the payment is a 10% coupon. So it's going to be 10% of 100, which is, 10% of 1,000, which is going to be 100. And we compute the present value. Now let me go ahead and do this for semi-annual interest really quickly. The future value doesn't change. The I/Y for semi-annual is we're going to take the 7% divided by 2, which is now 3.5%. The N is 10 years, but we're converting everything to 6-month increments, so it's going to be 10 times 2, which is 20. And the payment is 100. What am I doing here? Okay, hang on. That goes away. I'm having a lot of trouble with this today. Okay. All right, doesn't want to, oh, here we go. All right. And the payment is going to be 100 divided by 2, which is 50, and we compute the present value. Now, I think I've got some numbers written down here, so I guess I just went ahead and worked through this. I believe that the present value of this is going to be 1,213.19, and the present value, no. Hang on. See, this is what happens when I work through this too fast before class. So this is the semi-annual. So this is the 1,213.19. 1,210.71. I think that's right. Is that what everybody's coming up with? Or is that backwards? Some of you are saying yes, some of you are saying no. So you're as confused as I am right now, which is not a good thing. Well, actually, the actual one that's on the practice questions, if you see that on the exam, it's pretty easy because it means both of them are going to have the same value. But I was just trying to give you practice working with semi-annual coupon interest rate bonds, but I kind of made it a little more difficult than it actually should be. So these are the right answers? So what you came up with? For annual and for semi-annual? So what you come up with here? How much? Well, why don't we just try this? Okay, so we'll just solve the mystery here. And what else am I missing here? Oh, 3.5. I/Y compute present value. No, that should be right. It is, but it's $100 per year. So since it's a semi-annual interest, you divide it by 2, so it would be 50. Yeah. All right. So this should be the correct answer. I know I'm crazy. I'm not that crazy though. Okay. I still. So 1,213.19 is the answer. And the reason that if you're looking at something like this, I mean, you may not see this on the test, but if you do, these two bonds with annual interest versus semi-annual interest, they're going to be pretty close, okay? So if you come up with something like $300 difference in the price, you're doing something wrong, okay? There's going to be $2, $3, $4, $5 difference in the price. That's going to be the only difference between annual and semi-annual interest. All right, so you divide the interest rate by 2, the I/Y, and you divide the payment by 2. And then the end you multiply by 2. So keep in mind, if you're dealing with semi-annual interest payments, you're just converting everything to 6-month increments. So if it says the bond matures in 10 years, 10 years is actually 10 times 2, or 26-month increments. Okay? All right. Let's see. Okay, number 11 is pretty straightforward, I think. The answer is D. Number 12, pretty simple to work. 8% preferred stock with a market price of $110 per share and a $100 par value pays a cash dividend of how much? Basically, you're going to base the cash dividend on the par value. So it would be $100 times 0.8, which would be $8. And the market price is just thrown in there to kind of confuse you a little bit. Number 13, a firm has an issue of preferred stock outstanding, has a stated annual dividend of $4. The required return on the preferred stock has been estimated to be 16%. The value of the preferred stock is. Now again, keep in mind, for preferred stock, this is very similar to, well, it's actually the same as a zero growth stock because the dividends aren't changing. So the formula for the zero growth stock is simply the dividend divided by the required return. So in this case, we know the dividend, $4. We know the required return, 0.16. So if we take 4 divided by 0.16, we're going to come up with, let's say, $25. And remember, this is the zero growth model, which can be used for common stocks that don't grow, whose dividends don't grow, or for preferred stock. Okay, number 14. It says a firm has experienced a constant annual growth, dividend growth of 9% on its common stock and expects the dividends per share in the coming year to be $2.70. The firm can earn 12% on similar risk, and it should say investments. The value of the firm's common stock is. So with number 14, this is a common stock valuation problem. The only thing you have to determine is the dividend D0, which was the last dividend to be paid, or D1, which is the next dividend to be paid. So when reading this, it tells me that in the coming year, they're going to pay a dividend of $2.70, so that would be D1. So we don't have to make any adjustments to this. And if I'm going to enter this information for so this is a constant growth stock, and that was the price of the stock at time period 0. If you're given D0, you'll multiply that by 1 plus the growth rate divided by the required return minus the growth rate. This also equals the next dividend to be paid divided by R minus G. And to be mathematically correct, I will put those in parentheses. For this problem, we're given D1, so we would just plug the numbers in, and that's going to be 270 divided by 0.12 minus 0.09. And that should equal $90 per share. Okay, so any questions about this? Now, if the question would have read, whatever the name of the company is, it doesn't have a name, but it recently paid a dividend of $2.70 per share. If it's just been paid, then that would be D0, so you would actually be using this part of the model. Okay, so it's all in reading the question and determining, has the dividend just been paid or is it going to be paid in the next time period? That's the key to this. So any questions about this? Everybody following? Because you're going to see at least one or two or three of these. All right. Okay, here's another one, number 15. Laceworld Incorporated has an expected dividend next year of $3, the growth rate of 10%, required return of 20%. The value of a share of Laceworld Incorporated's common stock is, okay, so that's very similar to what we just did. It would be the $3 divided by the 0.2 minus 0.1. And once you go through and work that, you should come up with an answer of B, which is $30 per share. So it's worked just like the one we just did. All right, let's see. Let's jump ahead to a couple of the other problems. Number 16. Okay, so we talked about that already a little bit. Answer is B. Number 17. Cash outlays that have previously been made and have no effect on the cash flows relevant to a current decision are called D, sunk cost. Remember, opportunity costs are included in your decision. Sunk costs are not included in your decision. Number 18, the initial investment, an increase in net working capital is considered a cash outflow. Now, we didn't really talk about this a lot, but what this is simply saying is net working capital is current assets minus current liabilities. And that goes back to chapter 3. And what that's simply saying is if a company, because it is investing, it has a new investment or a new asset, if it takes up current assets, those are assets that cannot be used for anything else. So in this case, that's considered a cash outflow, and it's going to be considered a cash outflow until that asset is sold. You can then, you'll receive the current assets back, and everything will be back to normal. But if you're increasing your current assets more than your current liabilities, that's a cash outflow. If current liabilities are going to increase more than current assets, that's a cash inflow related to, and that's related to an investment. And that's also in your slides and in your textbook. The final step of the capital budgeting process, we looked at this briefly, but we said that is follow-up, the last step. Number 20, at capital expenditures, all of the following except C, an outlay for current asset expansion. Number 21, the answer is B, independent projects do not compete with one another. The acceptance of one does not eliminate others from consideration. And this is what we talked about earlier, conventional cash flow pattern is C, it's an outflow or the initial investment followed by a series of inflows. A firm evaluating a proposal with an initial investment of $35,000 has cash flows of $10,000 in year 1, $20,000 in year 2, and $10,000 in year 3. The payback period is, okay, so let me bring that up really quickly. I think I worked that out. Okay, so I did. Okay, so this is the payback period, pretty straightforward. What you're going to do is you're going to find the year before full payback, and so we can see year 1 we recover $10,000, year 2 we recover $20,000. We're trying to recover $35,000. So year 2 is a year before full recovery. In year 3, we still need to recover 5,000, and the total cash flow during year 3 is 10,000. So the payback period for this particular asset is 2.5 years. And actually the answer is D, between 2 and 3 years. Does anybody have any questions about this? This is the first capital budgeting technique question that we've worked. Question? All right. Okay, this, back on the study guide, there was something about know how to rank the different projects. This is basically what it's talking about, okay? So it says a firm is evaluating 3 capital projects. The net present value for the projects are as follows. Project 1 has an NPV of positive 100, Project 2, NPV of 0, and Project 3, a net present value of negative 100. So basically, which ones should you accept or reject? And in looking at this, we said we would accept a project with a 0 net present value, okay, at least temporarily we can do that. So we would accept project 1 and 2, and we would reject project 3 because of its negative net present value. And again, with this answer, we have to assume which one. These projects are mutually exclusive, or these projects are independent of each other. They're independent, okay, because we're accepting 1 and 2. If they were mutually exclusive, we could only choose 1. All right, 25, what are we calculating here? Oh, net present value. All right, so the cost of capital is 15%. We have an initial investment of $5 million and expected after-tax operating cash flows of these numbers, okay? What is the net present value? So, and I think 26 also matches that. Okay, so for 25 and 26, once you have the cash flows in, notice the cash flows match each other, so you can calculate net present value and internal rate of return by entering the cash flows one time. Okay, so that's what I will do here. So, okay, so I'm going to go to my cash flow register. I'm then going to press second and clear work to clear out any old cash flows. And then I'm going to enter the information. So it says the initial investment is $5 million. So that's $5 million negative. And then press the enter key. I'll then press the down arrow key. Cash flow number 1 is $1,800,000. Press the enter key, and that's positive, so we'll just press the enter key. Press the down arrow. The frequency is set to 1, which is what we want it to be, so we will press the down arrow key and go to cash flow 2, which is $1.9 million. Press the enter key. Down arrow, frequency is 1, that's correct, so we'll go to cash flow number 3, which is $1.7 million. Press the enter key, the down arrow key, and finally cash flow 4 is $1.3 million. And press the enter key. And we can check the frequency, which is 1, and if we want to press the down arrow key again, we can go to cash flow 5, which should be 0. There's no cash flow 5, and then it's going to take us back around to where we started. So we can go back and check our cash flows and make sure they're all there. All right, once we've done this, then it wants the net present value, so we're going to press the NPV key. It tells us here the cost of capital is 15%, so we're just going to enter 15. Press the enter key to lock it in. Press the down arrow key 1 time, and it tells us here, press the compute key. hope that matches one of the possible answers. Okay. Now, no, it's kind of hard to see here, but notice you've got a negative sign here. Okay, if you just glance at this really quickly, actually it looks worse on my screen than it does up here when it's magnified. But on my screen, it looks really small. So 137,052, negative. And so that would not be an acceptable project. Number 26 is what is the internal rate of return? So if I press the internal rate of return key, since I've already had the cash flows in, and the compute key, it says the internal rate of return is 13.57%, which is less than the cost of capital of 15%, which also means it is not an acceptable project. So did everybody come up with the right answers? My BA2 plus users, my TA84 users? No? What about my TA84 users here? It says error? Okay. Go for which calculator? Okay. Are you coming up with the... Say that again. For 26, all I did was, since I've already got the cash flows in for 25, all I did was press the internal rate of return key and the compute key. Okay? And that was because I already had the cash flows in. If this were a separate internal rate of return problem with new cash flows, I would have to press the cash flow button, second, clear work, and then put the cash flows in, and then press the internal rate of return key and the compute key. How about my TA84 getting the right answers? One of you, now I know you don't have time over the next 10 days or so, but one of you nice people using the TA84 should put together just a little user's manual of calculating net present value, internal rate of return, time value of money. That way, the next class that I teach, they won't have to go through all of this. I can just post it on Canvas. This is how you calculate. Now, there is something on that for some basic time value of money, but not the capital budgeting question. So if you're bored this summer, need something to do, you can throw that together, email it to me. I will be eternally grateful. I will actually put your name on it, and you will be known in my classes for the next however many years as the person who wrote that user's manual. I will give you credit. That still won't motivate you to do it probably, but that's the best I've got, okay? But for the next finance class you take from me, yes, I'll give you a bonus point. Is anybody getting the right answer with the TA84? Because I know we've done this before and you came up with the right answer, so I'm just kind of curious. Do what? It is this, negative 137,053. For after you've entered the cash flows, you press the NPV. Yeah, so you've got to use the whole number. Yeah. So that's correct, and then you press your down arrow key and compute. Okay, now make sure we discovered this the other day, when you're putting in your interest rate, put it in as a whole number, 15 instead of as 0.15. So I think some of you came up with that the other day, which caused your numbers to be way off. Okay, while you're working on that, let me go ahead and jump ahead to um, number 27, yield to maturity, $1,000 par value bond, 1120. And we've actually done one of these already, but let me go ahead and so let me go ahead and put the inputs down for this really quickly. This is 27. Okay, so these are your inputs for number 27, yield to maturity. And it should be, once you calculate this, it should come up to be or it'd be 9.3%. 28, let me go ahead and do the inputs for number 28. Number 28, what is the current price of a $1,000 par value bond maturing in 12 years? 14% coupon, semi-annual interest payments, yield to maturity of 13%. So for number 28, the future value, 1,000. N is going to be 12 times 2, it's 24 because this is a semi-annual interest bond. Coupon rate is 14%, so that's going to be 140 per year divided by 2, which is 70 every 6 months. And then the I/Y is 13% divided by 2, get this to right, which is 6.5. And we're doing the present value. And then, does everybody have this written down? I'm going to jump ahead to 29 too, since we've got it. Okay, so for 29, okay, yield to maturity, $1,000 par value bond, so future value, present value, negative 925, matures in 8 years. Now interest is paid semi-annually, so in 8 times 2, which is 16, and the payment is going to be a 10% coupon, so that's going to be 100 divided by 2, which is $50 every 6 months. Now, this is where I mentioned earlier it gets a little tricky, because what you're going to do is you're going to compute the I/Y. And you're going to come up with whatever number it is. But since this is a semi-annual interest payment bond, and this is what I'm working on, number 29, so when I enter this information into my calculator, now again, keep in mind you're leaving your calculator set on one payment per year. So 1,000 was the future value, 925 negative was the present value. What did we say? 16 is in. and 50 is the payment. Compute I/Y. Now, when you compute this with a semi-annual interest payment bond, this is the 6-month interest rate, okay? So we have to take the 5.7284 multiplied by 2, which should come up to be answer A, which is 11.46%, which is the actual yield to maturity. And remember, this is only on semi-annual interest payment bonds, yield to maturity calculations. You may see one of those on the test, but I want you to know how to handle it. Number 30, I think, is pretty straightforward. It's a constant growth valuation problem. Let me take a look at the other ones really quickly. Number 31, zero growth. Share of common stock pays annual dividend of $6. It's not expected to grow, so it would simply be 6 divided by 0.12, and that should equal, what's the answer here? A, which is $50. 32, investment banker. 33, repurchase of outstanding stock. 34, I think we already looked at this maybe, but a conventional cash flow pattern. And then 35, okay, there's the other answer. So B, book value. Now, the key here, and somebody had asked about this because they looked at it in the book, I think it was, and they said, what's the difference between book value and liquidation value? Well, the difference here is actually going to be right here where it says that if the firm's assets are sold, now the difference is going to be for book value, it's going to be the assets are sold for their book value. Liquidation value, the definition would be the assets are sold for their market value. Okay, there's a difference between book value, what it's worth on the balance sheet, and actual market value, what you can really get for an asset when you sell it. And so that's the difference between book value and liquidation value. And 36, PE multiple, 37, answer is D. Okay, so is everybody comfortable with these 37 questions? So is everybody comfortable with these? Let me give you a tip. I would probably take a look at these as you're preparing for the test, okay? You may see some of these again, but of course there's going to be other questions, but take a close look at these, know how to work all of these problems, know the answers to these. All right, remember we're not having class on Thursday. I have really enjoyed having class with you. Study hard for the next few days. Your final is Tuesday at 1:30 in this classroom. If you have any questions, you can email me, come by and make an appointment, come by and see me. I'll be happy to work with you before the test. All right, so everybody have a great rest of the week.